tutorial, we are going to be looking at how to use the volume builder to create meshes and organic forms and the ways to use it to make some interesting things. So the item we are going to be modeling is going to be based on a monarch caterpillar. It's not going to be perfect, but we're going to be using it as a way to kind of quickly introduce the tool and the way of working. And then from the volume builder, we're going to go on and we're going to be looking at the Z Remesher generator, which basically allows you to generate a uniform mesh from whatever geometry you feed into it. And there's some tricks to that, some settings, and we'll look at that as well. But first, we're going to go through how to build things using the volume builder. Okay, so these are our references, right? We're just going to be looking at how at these images just in order to get the count of legs, where legs are positioned, what the body generally looks like. We're not going to be worried too much about the wrinkliness right now. What our goal is to use the volume builder and Z Remesher to create a mesh that we can much more easily UV unwrap or paint in 3D paint mode or whatever we need to do with it, and still have it look, pretty fantastic. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. So if you open up Cinema, the first thing we need to do is, when you start modeling, you should always think about like the object that you want to model and what are the most basic shapes that create that object, right? So if I look at this caterpillar, it is most closely, if I look at other photos as well, it is most closely related to a capsule, right? It's, if you imagine basically it's like a hot dog, right? If you imagine like a long, narrow capsule, that's basically what this looks like. But it does look like it's maybe a little melted or flattened, right? Because it kind of fattens out at the bottom edge. And then there's all the legs. And if we think about the shape of the legs, right, these legs are more or less cylinders, or maybe they're slightly conical shaped, except for these that have the spikes on the end. And then there's the antenna, and there's this headpiece as well, which is actually a little bit different. And we're not going to model the head in this tutorial. We're just going to focus on the body, and we would drop the head on there as a child at the end. But we'll look at how to do all of that. So we need these antennae, we need the general capsule shape, and we need these stubby little legs. And you'll note there's 2 here at the back. There's 1, 2, 3, 4. So 2 sets of 4 there, and then 2 sets of 3 up front. All right, let's get started. So let's create a capsule. So we're going to create a capsule. We're going to make this in the Z plus dimension. And then because we are not using this and because we are not using any measurements whatsoever for this, right? We're just doing this to demonstrate the tool. We're going to go ahead and just make it seem like it's about proportional in its default dimensions to the caterpillar, which I would say we're almost there right now. That's probably perfect. So I just have it set to 50 centimeters radius, and the height is set to 572. Okay, so I've got my capsule, and now, right, I don't want it to be a perfect capsule, right? I want it to kind of flatten, get a little fatter on the edges and be more flat on one side. There's several different ways we could do that, and we could even do it in the volume builder by basically subtracting like a rectangle from here and doing some other work to get that to smash and be flat. And we can look at that method, but I also want to show you that there is this one of these deformers here called melt, surprisingly enough. And if I can find it on here, here it is. It looks like a popsicle. If I make this deformer a child of the capsule, initially it's just going to be smushed all the way out flat. And that's because there's several things here that we need to change. First, there's the melted size. Let's go ahead and set that down to 100% because we don't really want it to get any bigger, although I do want you to note that even without it being any bigger, it is still actually longer than it needs to be. And then there's the strength as well, right? If I dial this strength down, you can see that I'm getting this like half a capsule, that the ground plane is basically where the capsule is stopping. You can imagine, right, this is something melting against the ground and spreading out, right? And so I want this to be melted a little bit, right? I want about that much of a shape to it, because if we look back at our reference, right, that's kind of how these caterpillars look. Now, the only issue is I don't want it to be totally half like that. I'd like it to either be a little bit bigger around or for this melt to be a little bit lower. So if I select the melt and I use the move tool, I can actually pull this down a little bit so it's below that ground plane. And you can see that I'm starting to get, right, a little bit more dimension to that shape. So I'm going to go ahead and increase that. This radius of 100, you'll note if I dial this down, you can kind of see how that works. Now you'll also note that this is, honestly 100 is probably pretty good. If I go up too high, right, it's going to just disappear all those, but 100 was actually just about right. Now there is this like vertical and radial randomness. And I am going to go ahead and we could pull those both down to 0, although the radial randomness seems to actually shrink it a little bit, which might be nice because we don't want it quite that long in the end. And then there's this noise scale. If I crank the noise up or down, we're not really seeing any difference, and that's because we have a pretty basic mesh right now. If I go to garage shading lines, right, you'll see that I don't have a whole lot of geometry here for this to play with. If I was to increase my height segments, I might get a more uniform feel. But again, we're going to be doing a lot of work to this thing, and so we don't necessarily need to do too much more to it. I might go ahead and decrease the strength to 4%. That's a little bit high. Let's do 3%. Or sorry, let's do 5 or 6%. Let's try 6%. That looks pretty good. And then let's see if we can set our melted size to less than 100%. So if I set this to 75, no, 100% is the minimum. So we'll just have to go in later and manipulate this mesh some. But this is a good starting point for our caterpillar body. We're going to make continue to make additional changes to it. You can see it's a little bit fattened out, but it's not, and we don't have it really tapered at either end right now. But those are things we're going to introduce some other tools and ways of working with meshes, especially when we're dealing with things that are more organic in form. We'll be doing here in just a second. Okay, so we've got the basic form done with our melt. I'm going to say I'm pretty happy with that, and I want to set my mesh to this for the time being. So I'm going to go ahead and just make this editable and open this up, and you'll see I still have the melt on, but my capsule itself is editable. So let's go ahead and make some adjustments here so we can get this to be a little bit more caterpillar shaped, right? If you look at this, they taper towards the ends. They're a little chunkier in the middle, although they are pretty much more uniform across the top in the center. So we've melted it. We still have the melt turned on. I'm going to leave this hump in here. But let's go ahead and taper our ends. So a tool I want to show you that we haven't really worked with in this tutorial series yet is the brush tool for manipulating meshes. So I'm going to go into points mode. And as soon as I do that, you'll note that I don't see the melt anymore. I just see the base capsule. And that's actually going to be really useful for what we're doing. So once I'm in points mode, I want to hit Command or Control A to select all the points on my object, and I just want to make sure I have the capsule selected. Once I've done that, if I come down here, there is this brush tool. Sometimes the iron is up top, sometimes the magnet is up top, but brush is what we want to use. And what we're going to do is we're going to be using this brush to basically push the mesh points around. Now, you can see that things go sideways pretty quickly, so we have to be careful. And there's a couple other settings we're going to do before we're ready to do that. So the first thing we want to do is we want to turn symmetry on. And we want to make sure that our symmetry is along the x-axis, right? And you'll see there's a plane here that we're seeing on end. And if I go ahead and try and manipulate these points now, perfect. All right, we just want to make sure that the that we are actually having symmetrical action. Occasionally, if you've made some other manipulations or changes to these points and they're a little bit offset from each other, sometimes you can get away with making the tolerance bigger. And if you make this tolerance bigger, basically what it's saying is, if this point is at 5 centimeters off the x-axis, and this point is at 3 centimeters off the x-axis, if your tolerance is 2 or maybe a little bit bigger than 2 centimeters, then it's going to treat those points as symmetrical, and it will move them together at the point on one side to the other, right? And if you're working on like a big object, right, this tolerance can be pretty high. If you're working on a small scale object, like if I was to actually make this caterpillar scale, I would want to dial that tolerance way down in order to effectively use this tool. Okay, we don't need anything else. I have symmetry on, show planes, and I have this check marked in the X. Okay, so now that we've done this, what we want to do is, one, our caterpillar is a little longer than we would like it to be, right? Because that melt's kind of pushed it out a little bit. So the first thing we want to do is we want to go to make sure our brush options are up. We can just click on this brush tool again and they will come up. And over here, my size is 30. I'm going to crank this up so that it fully covers the end of this object. And the first thing we're going to do to it isn't going to impact our symmetry too much. We do want this in smear mode, and we're going to go ahead and leave as it stands. Now, the thing is, we basically want to make sure if we click this point, right, you'll notice like I'm getting the inside points are moving, but those outside points aren't. And so what I need to do is I either need to increase my strength, or make some other changes. One change I could make is I could boost this up a little bit bigger, and we could see if that helps. It does a little bit, but it's still not uniformly moving that mesh. So then the other option that's definitely necessary here is our bell, is the fall off, right? This basically says, when I'm using this brush to move these points, how is it falling off, right? How is that the intensity of movement changing over time, right? In my current setup, it's the bell shape, right? So it's actually kind of reminiscent of this, right? But you can think of like a bell curve, right? Like it kind of sweeps up and it sweeps down if you're thinking about this as a graph of the intensity, right? And you can imagine it, and I wish I had this set so I could see the gradient on here. I can't remember how to do that right now. But you can imagine this is like a gradient brush, like a very soft brush where I've got like 100% impact in the center, and then as it goes towards the edges, it fades out. Now, there is this option, and for what we're doing right now, that's going to work really well, which is constant. Right? And so I've got this set. If I set constant, that means the entire area of the circle of my brush is going to have the same impact. And that's what I want here, because I just want to tuck this end in a little bit. You'll note it started to hit that, and I don't want to necessarily do that. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to tuck this end a little bit too until I just get to that point. All right? Okay, so I've got these two ends pushed in just a hair. And now what I want to do is I want to make sure that oh yeah, it's still working great. Okay, so now I could continue to use constant, or if I wanted to have a bit more of a gentle impact on the shape of this, right, I can switch to bell. And all I want to do is I just want to taper these ends in just a little bit. And what's nice about this, right, is this is a really nice, even way to manipulate a mesh that we want to have, that we are desiring to have like an organic form that's uniform and smooth, and we're making these variations over time, right? Much better than trying to like select all these edges and move them out independently and things like that. Okay, so again, this is just for, right, we're learning these tools. I'm vaguely referencing the actual caterpillar. So let's go ahead and let's see what this looks like. If I turn that melt off, you can see it's still bigger, but we're actually getting, right, a lot more taper in here. And so maybe what we'll do is we'll come back here and we'll just do a little bit more work. I want to taper these ends just a touch more. And taper these ends just a touch more too. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and switch our view and rotate our view and see what we've got here. You can see that, right, we've tapered the sides in, but we have not been manipulating it vertically at all. And that's actually probably good for us. Let's go ahead and turn, let's go back to object mode so we can see that, that melt, right? And maybe our melt is still a little intense. We might want to pull this down a touch more. So I'm going to use the move tool, and I'm just going to move this, migrate this down just a touch more. Something like that might be really nice. Okay. And I don't know how much I moved it down, but again, it's just really based on like what this visually looks like. Okay, so I've got my base object, and I'm going to be adding legs and everything else to this. So let's go ahead and start thinking about our legs. If we go ahead and look at some of these references, I don't even know if any of these images have I think this one does maybe, although that looks like it's actually a fake model of a caterpillar. But these legs, and one of these photos you can kind of see, they're sort of suction cuppy, and they're conical shaped, but with a flatted end. So let's go ahead and start that process. So let's go ahead and create a cone. And we're going to need to flip this cone over. So we are going to make this a y minus cone. And then we're going to need this to be significantly smaller on the bottom radius. And because this is upside down, the top is the bottom. So we are going to go ahead and let's just set this to 10 to start with. That's going to be too small. Let's set it to 15. And then the height is, way too tall. So let's go ahead and set our height down to, let's just say 35 right now. I don't know if that's going to be long enough or too long or too short. And then our top radius, which is going to be hard to see, but let's go ahead and pull this down so we can actually see our leg here and zoom in a little bit. All right, we want to make the top radius bigger, and I'm going to make it 10. Right, that provides a pretty stout little leg. And if we look at our references, I would say that's a good starting place for at least for these back legs, right? The front legs are going to be a little different, but we will get to those later. Okay, so I've got my one leg, and I'm pretty happy with this as a starting place. Now what I want to do is if again we look at this, we have two back legs, and then we have this set of 4 kind of mid legs here. So let's go ahead and start with this, and we'll just call this back leg. And what we want to do is we want to do as little work as possible and make aligning this as easy as possible. So we are going to go ahead and use a symmetry object, right? A symmetry generator. So if I click over here and I go down to symmetry, and I drop this in, I want you to remember, right, this is symmetry in terms of moving points on an object. And this is symmetry in terms of like making multiple copies of object across an axis. So I'm going to select my symmetry object, and I believe this is the correct setting. Everything should be good. Let's go ahead and select our leg and move it off to one side, and we will see that we actually get 2 of them. Yay. So let's rotate our view a little bit, and let's start moving this entire object. And I'm actually going to move the entire symmetry over here. That's going to make things a lot easier as we go, right? We don't want the parent object to be centered here and then the legs over here. That's going to be weird as we go further with some of our other things. And I'm just going to tuck these up until they kind of intersect the body. And then I'm going to pull them significantly closer to the end. I'm going to look again at this, and you can see that, right, they're very close to the end of this model. So I'm going to hit the letter T. I need to taper the, actually, yeah, I don't want to do that. I want to move these in this direction, but what I want to do is I want to move the leg, not the symmetry. So I'm going to move those in just a touch. Maybe we can take our symmetry and pull it a little bit back further towards the end, and then bring our legs in just a touch more. Okay, so it looks like we've got some back legs on here. They might be a little long at this point. We might want to push these up into the mesh a little bit, and then maybe we can just say take the height down to say 30. Okay, so we've got our base back legs, fantastic. Let's go ahead and copy the back leg object, not the symmetry, just the object, and we're going to paste it. So we have another copy of this in our scene. And for these next 8 legs, instead of just basically copying and pasting this over and over again, we're going to be using a cloner in order to paste at least one row of these, and then we'll use a symmetry to make that symmetrical. And so I'm going to go ahead and create a cloner. I'm going to take my back leg, make it a child of the cloner, which is going to give us this huge grid of clones. Just to show you different ways you can use it, what we're going to do is we're going to change this to linear mode. And then we are going to say, right now, linear mode is moving things in the Y direction. We don't want to do that. We want to set 0 there. We want to move this along the x-axis, which is the length of the caterpillar's body. So let's go ahead and say 20. And now, right, we can't see anything, and that's because our legs are currently inside the body of this caterpillar. So I'm just going to pull them down until they pop out the bottom. And I'm going to rotate my view so I can actually see that they're somewhat connected. And you can see, right, my spacing is too small at 20, so let's go ahead and do 40. And then we're going to go ahead and make the count 4 because we actually have 4 legs. And then let's look at our reference image and see how far apart these legs are. And I'm going to go ahead and go into my side view so I can, more easily see about the distance between each leg. And let's look at our reference. And you can see there's, at least a full leg between each one, maybe a bit more. So let's go ahead and use our cloner and take our Z and just stretch it until we're about happy with this. It should be, right, our width is about 30, so 60 should be about right. And if we look at our caterpillar, let's see where this first leg is a little bit in front of the halfway point, right? If we kind of went halfway, it's like it should actually be between these first 2 legs about here. We've got our one set of legs right now. Let's go ahead and use a symmetry object. So we're going to go ahead here, symmetry, make our cloner a child of the symmetry, and then we're going to go ahead and pull these legs one way or the other to make our clones happen. And there we go. Okay. So now we've got those set, but you'll notice, right, our legs are currently much lower than the back legs. So let's go ahead and try and even these out with those, right? They don't have to be perfect. We just want to get them reasonably close, right? And now they should be tucking into the body a little bit as well. And we're in a good spot with those legs. So let's look at the front legs real quick in our reference. Right, so if I zoom in on this reference some, you'll see that, right, there are these stabby claws. And then there's much shorter legs that those stabby claws come out of. And so what we're going to do for these is we're going to use the same, we're basically going to copy this symmetry in this cloner, change it to 3, and then we'll adjust the legs a little bit. Now, with this and with the volume builder, we're not going to want to put the spikes in the volume builder. And you'll see why when we get to it. But we're going to want those to be like a separate object, right? Because the volume builder basically rounds a lot of geometry, and it doesn't do so well with sharp points. And so if we want a sharp point on something, we want that to be external, but kind of embedded in the object. And so we'll look at how to do that as we keep going. So let's go ahead and I'm going to change the name of this symmetry to mid legs because things are already starting to get a little crazy. I'm going to call this one back legs. And that's because these are the top level objects, right? And so I can hide my legs and my cloners and all of that. And I can actually know what I'm clicking on. So I'm going to go ahead and copy my mid legs and paste it. And then I'm going to call this front legs instead. And once I've set that up, I can pop this open, select the cloner for my front legs. Let's go ahead and set this to 3. And then let's move these forward along the body. All right, we're going to go this direction. You'll notice, right, my planes are growing and changing. But overall, I'm in a pretty good spot. Okay, let's see what we got here. So we've got our front 3 legs. Let's see how far forward these are in our model. They go really far forward, and you'll note that I may actually need to taper the angle here a little bit, but that's something we can do. We can make this editable and then adjust the angle and rotation of our 2 cloners here in a little bit. But yeah, so let's get this one close to this head. Let's go ahead and look in our 3/4 view and see if that seems good. That looks pretty good. The spacing looks like it's about the same, although honestly, these are probably spaced a little bit further back than these other 2. We could always do that. In our case, I don't think it's necessary for us to learn about how these tools work. And you can see all of these are a little bit too far out to one side, so we will tug these in just a little bit so that those back 2 sets are at least already ready to go there. Okay, so I've got these set. Now there's a few things I want to do before I go ahead and make this group editable so I can adjust the position of these different legs. One of those is that I need to make these shorter. So I'm selecting my back leg here on this cloner for my front legs, which I should probably just call this front leg so I don't get confused. And then what I want to do is I want to reduce the height on this. I'm going to set it down to 20. And that seems pretty good. And then I'm going to select my cloner, and I'm going to pull these in just a touch, but not too much. Really, what I'm trying to do is pay attention to that last one. And maybe if I go to my side view, yeah, right. I want there to be room for the spikes to be protruding from the legs there, and these should be pretty subtle. Okay. Then the next thing that I need to do is I actually need to duplicate this cloner and really the front legs, and I need to make spikes that are going to be aligned with these clones. So I'm going to go ahead and hit copy and paste. And front legs 1, I'm going to change to leg spikes. I don't know, claws, whatever you want to call them. And now what I need to do is I'm going to move this cloner down and out. And so I'm going to look in my front view, and I'm going to go ahead and pull these down. And I want them to be a little bit inset into the existing legs, if you can see that in this model, right? They're kind of overlapping. And obviously they're huge right now. So I'm going to go ahead and change my top radius to, right, and these are inverted, so I want my top radius to be maybe, I actually need that to be 0, so they come to a point. And then the bottom radius needs to be, let's make it 8, right? Because I want these to be inset a little bit, and if I go and look here, right, you'll see that they're inset. Now, these are essentially placeholders at this point. We could actually use a bend deformer to make these bendy as well while we're at it. Why don't we go ahead and do that? Let's go take a bend. We're going to go onto our front leg. You'll note that we're going to get a bunch of copies of that. We're going to say fit to parent so that they're actually, those boxes are just around the things. Okay, so I've got these set. Now if I go to adjust this, right, I'm going to have, it's going from the opposite end that I would like it to. So instead of going that way, what I need to do, and unfortunately none of these alignments are going to work, what I need to do is I need to rotate this thing 180 degrees, right? So that that arrow is actually pointing down. So if I say 180, and then I go back to my object field and bend this, hey, look at that, right? And we want these to bend in just a little bit. Okay, so now we've got spikes, all right? This caterpillar is like ready to eat some milkweed. Okay, so we want to be able to have these tuck into the edges. Now, we could make this all editable, open this up, create, 3 sets of 2 symmetries or whatever, but the cloner actually has a setting that really helps out in this case. So if I go to my cloner and I'm on my object tab, right, we've already set the distance in the Z, which is the distance between the clones this way. We can also make adjustments in the X and the Y, right? Y would either raise or lower these clones, and this is per step, right? That's what it says here. So what we want to do is we want to actually use this X value to adjust the width per step, right? If I, sorry, I'm on the wrong one. Let's go ahead and do the front legs cloner first. And then we'll just copy the value to the next one, right? But so if I was to go like, if I was to increase the X, you can see it's going from here, this is the starting point, and it's slowly increasing the amount. Or I can go negative, and I can, right, shrink it in this way. But whatever the case, you'll note that it is going, this is our first step. And so that's problematic. So let's go ahead and we have this in the symmetry. So let's go ahead and make these a little bit wider. Let's say 7. Sure. And then we are going to go ahead and take this and we're going to adjust the position of our we're going to adjust the position of our cloner, the actual big position here. We're going to make this 7 less than 36. So that would be, in my case, 20 whatever, but I keep clicking on the wrong cloner. All right, so this is 34. So let's go, we could either try to do this or we could just say that number and then -7 in this field, and that will shrink that in 7, okay? It looks like maybe if I rotate my view a bit, that's looking pretty good. I did it, 7 was just about right in terms of that angle, but maybe I should just subtract one more. And in this case, right, I can just come in here. It's 27. I can make this 26. Let's actually go ahead and make it 23. Okay, that seems to be about right. So then we need to mirror that on our spikes. So I'm going to go ahead and go to my spikes cloner correctly this time. I'm going to make this 23. Then I'm going to go to my object tab. I'm going to go down to my steps, and in X, I'm going to say -7. And I'm going to rotate my view because that was probably too much. Yes, it was. Maybe I need to say that is 7, not -7. There we go. And you can see that 23 wasn't quite right. It's not these aren't perfectly aligned anymore. So I'm going to go ahead and just manually use the move tool until I get these a little bit closer to center. They don't have to be perfect, but that should do pretty well for our purposes. Okay. So we've got our caterpillar roughed out minus our antenna. Now, something that's really annoying at this point is all of these planes that are overlapping each other and making it really hard to see what's going on. In Cinema, if you select objects of the same type, multiple objects of the same type, so if I select this symmetry, this symmetry, this symmetry, and this symmetry, right? I'm not selecting the children, I'm just selecting the parent objects. And I come down here, you'll see I can adjust all the settings on all of these objects at once. So if I uncheck Show Planes, it's going to turn off all of those planes, which is really, really helpful. So we've got all of these objects. Now what we need are the antenna, right? And there's 2 true antenna by the head that are significantly longer, and then there's 2 false antenna that are shorter by the tail. So let's go ahead and set those antenna. And so, right, this is our head end over here. Let's go to our side view. And we are going to we're going to be making these using a sweep. And so I'm going to go ahead and start with my spline tool. And I need to see where these are. It looks like they are between the front 2 pairs of legs. So somewhere in here, and they probably are about this far down the body. I'm going to click, and I'm just going to click to create points. And I know from previous experience that it's something like this is probably accurate. If I go back over here, you can see there's like, the long body and then a little bend at the top. I'm going to hit escape. And then I have all these hard corners, and that's not really what we want. But with my spline selected, if I hit Command or Control A, I can select all those points. And then I can come over here, I can as long as I have the spline pen tool selected, I can right click and I can say soft tangents. Right? Oh, and I guess it just did it for that one. I thought it was going to do it for all of them. I'm going to go ahead and right click over here and say soft tangents again. And I don't need to worry about soft tangents for the ends unless I wanted this to curl more or something like that, or another change down here. But in my case, I'm going to leave those alone. Okay, so once I've got that spline selected, I'm going to call this the antennae. Okay, and then we need to go to the other end of the body and look at where these attach, and it's between, somewhere about halfway between the back legs and the mid legs. And I want to make sure that I don't have the original spline selected anymore, or else it will make it all one spline. I want to select the spline tool, and somewhere about here, again, I'm going to go ahead and click. And these are significantly shorter, so I'm going to keep those about that length. I'm going to hit escape. I'm going to select this one point, right click, and say soft tangents. And then, I could come through here and pull this out, warp it a little bit, but I'm going to leave it as it stands for now. Okay, so we've done that. So let's go ahead and make these into sweeps. And if you haven't learned yet, you can always select an object. And if you hold down Option or Alt, if you're on Option on Mac, Alt on Windows machine, you can hold this down and you can come over here to your sweep. Oops. You can click and drag and go to sweep, and it will automatically make the antenna a child of the sweep. We're going to do the same thing with this spline. So I'm going to select this spline. I'm just going to leave it named spline for now. I'm going to hold down Option, click, drag, go to sweep. And then we're going to need our cross-section spline as well. So I'm going to go back to my primary view, and I'm going to create a circle. And it's going to be huge and in the wrong orientation. So I am going to start by going to my my object tab. I'm going to make this, I think we wanted it, I'm going to start at 10 centimeters. That's probably still way too big. And then I'm going to make it in the XZ plane. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use the same, I'm going to copy this circle. I'm going to put it as a child in one and copy it to the other. So I'm going to go ahead and make this the first child here. You'll see something's happening over there. And if I hold down Control and click and drag, I can drop this in as the first child here, and you'll see something else is happening here. Now, when we do that, if we rotate our view, you'll see that they are not the way we want them to be. So that just means we need to click on our circle and the plane until we get the right one. So XY is correct for this, so I will do the same for this other one. We should be good to go. Okay, so these are huge at this point. And if we look at our reference, even for the big one, they're too big. So let's go ahead and remember, if I have multiple objects of the same type selected, I can change them together. So I am going to go ahead and hold down Command and click on this other circle. So I have both selected. I'm going to set this to 5. That looks like it's much closer in scale to how it should be. Then what I need to do is select my sweeps. And so I'm going to select one sweep. I'm going to hold down Command, select the other. And I want the end scale of these to be 0. Or maybe we can make it like 1% or 2%, or let's say 5%. Feel like that might do better for us here in the future. We'll see. These are things we're going to be able to change as we go forward. Okay, so I've got my 2 sweeps. Now, something I might want to do is, I'm going to leave these the way they are, but if you wanted to, at this point, you could select, say, the endpoint here and use the move tool and actually, move this off in one direction or the other, but you'll note I can't move it right now. The reason for that is that we have symmetry on, so if I turn this off, I could move this so it angles out to one side or the other. And I think I'm going to go ahead and do that, at least on this one, just so we can see the result when we put this in our model. Okay, so I've got this set. let's go ahead and put both of these in a symmetry object. So I'm going to go ahead and come down here and go to symmetry. I'm going to make my sweep a child of the symmetry. I'm going to go ahead and pull this out. And you can see that I am now getting two antennae coming out the sides there. You might note that this, right, they're a little bit raising up out of the surface. I'm going to go ahead and just pull them down and in a little bit. And now I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing for my other spline. So again, I can click the sweep. If I hold down Option and click over here and go down to symmetry, it should make it a child automatically of the new symmetry. And then I can pull this over. Oh, I have the symmetry selected. I can select the sweep, pull the sweep over, and have this come out to about here. And then again, I'm probably going to need to pull this down and in just a little bit so it intersects that mesh a little bit better. Okay, we are at a really good stopping point. And in the next section, we will drop this into a volume builder and see how we can make this thing happen. So go ahead and save your caterpillar.